How's it going, people? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video I wanted to talk about how Porsche and Siemens Energy could be about to change the face of the future of mobility forever, or at least be a part of the reason as to why petrolheads may be able to enjoy their cars much further into the future than they might have originally thought. I'll give you the background info, I'll give you the pros and cons, I'll give you my thoughts on whether this will affect rulings on combustion engine cars in the future as well, and I'll give you my thoughts on how this will affect the market more broadly. If you enjoyed the video, remember to hit the like button as it's an easy way to help the channel out, but without further ado, let's get into the video. So on the 12th of December, Porsche released a statement that they had advanced their climate-neutral eFuels development. To briefly summarise, Porsche and Siemens, among a bunch of other companies, are developing and implementing a pilot project in Chile to create a massive factory. This factory will be the world's first to create synthetic fuels on an industrial scale. So the first question is, what are synthetic fuels, or eFuels as they're also known as? Well, the first thing to note is that they're not anything new. They are basically complex hydrocarbons that are made by man, which no longer rely on the fossil fuel process, which takes like 50 million plus years in order to create oil, which you can then use to burn and obviously turn into petrol, etc. Water is separated into hydrogen and oxygen using wind energy, then CO2 filtered from the air is combined with the hydrogen to form methanol, which is then turned into usable fuel by methanol to gasoline technology, which is licensed by ExxonMobil. Now, ExxonMobil are one of the world's largest publicly traded international oil and gas companies, and I think it's a pretty good idea of them getting on this technology nice and early to try and future-proof themselves against the non-oil and gas future of the world that is potentially going to happen. Already we're seeing a decrease in impact to the environment. So you're actually taking CO2 emissions out of the air, and then you're not having to also mine or drill for oil in the actual ground. So a minimized impact on the environment overall, but also less impact on habitats, on the ocean, less likelihood of oil spills into the ocean, all that good stuff. And the reason why this area in Chile has been chosen specifically is because of the wind conditions which will be used to separate the hydrogen from oxygen. It's not just this though, they're actually engineered to release fewer emissions than petrol or diesel, because obviously as we can take control over the creation process, we can start to try and filter out some of those emissions. The ultimate goal of which would be that it becomes carbon neutral. So theoretically, if all vehicles were running e-fuels, they would be reducing CO2 just as much as they were giving out CO2, making it completely neutral. So at least through vehicles, we wouldn't be raising CO2 levels. And most importantly, it's not just for petrol cars, it's also for diesel cars too, and this would work in both old and new petrol and diesel cars as well. Now, when I first read about this, I thought it was almost too good to be true. How could there be this fuel that doesn't affect the environment but still enables me to just hoon it around in my MX-5 or in a supercar in the future and all that other fun stuff and make a lot of loud noises? My initial thoughts went straight to conspiracy in terms of thinking that maybe oil companies don't want this technology to affect their margins, or maybe the electric vehicle companies didn't suddenly want the combustion engine to become a usable and viable thing for the future because they're investing all this money into all this electronic vehicle tech. But that is just speculation, so I decided to look into the actual e-fuels themselves and talk about the pros and cons of us switching to using e-fuels over petrol or anything else. So let's start with the fun stuff, the pros. So obviously we've got a reduction in overall CO2 emissions by us as humans. That would be pretty significant, especially when you think that transport is responsible for nearly 30% of the EU's total CO2 emissions, of which 72% comes from road transportation. Now obviously that has key benefits for the environment and also just for us as people as well, not having to breathe in so much CO2 all of the time. It's good for our longer term health. I live in London, and obviously London asthma is genuinely a thing. People just taking in too many pollutants and then not being able to breathe properly. But one of the key pros of using e-fuels, for me at least, is the use of combustion engine cars continuing without having to modify them or replace them. If hypothetically the whole world decided to switch away from using combustion engined cars, think about how many cars would have to come in to replace all of the cars that were disappearing off with combustion engines. The Carbon Trust suggests that 26 million tons of CO2 is produced every year in just creating cars. Now imagine if the switch to renewable energy had to be really quick, suddenly we'd have to create a whole bunch more CO2 just to create the necessary EVs or hydrogen fueled cars or whatever. Not to mention all of the mining and other stuff that would be required to get all the necessary materials in order to do that. By being enabled to use cars that already exist and having no impact on the environment in terms of their emissions, that issue no longer exists. Plus it means that we get to keep driving nice internal combustion engine cars, which I'm all for. And therefore, as part of that, even if we are going to move away from internal combustion engine cars, it means that we can do it over an extended period of time, which in my head is yet another pro. A gradual change means that we don't have to really uproot all of our existing infrastructure and networks overnight and then release a whole bunch of CO2 emissions in doing so. And we don't have to make up for the demand of cars that aren't internal combustion engined. You can still make moves towards electric vehicles and nuclear cars and all that other kind of stuff over time and get that tech to a place where we don't feel any difference to our day-to-day lives. One reason that makes eFuels also better than biofuels is the fact that it doesn't compete with food. To an extent, biofuels rely on food or foodstuffs or waste products in that kind of sense to be able to create the fuel, whereas in this case, we don't have to worry about that so much. The only food required will be for the people who are operating all the machinery and all the other good stuff. Another key pro is that it continues to use our existing network of filling stations, of car mechanics, and generally let us continue our lives as conveniently as we have done thus far. And that's not forgetting obviously that we can still continue to drive nice internal combustion engine cars and also have motorsports that sound good. But there are two very important cons as well, which I have to talk about in order for this to not be completely biased and be like, yes, I like driving nice sounding cars, can we please keep some form of petrol? The first one is that there could be a potential impact on technology longer term in terms of companies being more lazy. It's an excuse to not develop technology that will solve problems in the future, and though I don't think that companies will necessarily take that short-term view and just rinse eFuels for as long as they can, I do think that it might just change the rhetoric around it a little bit. If finding renewable energy sources and sustainable ones as well isn't at the top of people's priorities, then we just probably won't do them to the same level as we might have done if it was an absolute must-do now thing. But then at the same time, it is a competitive market and there is the potential that companies will just continue to go down those routes regardless. And the second one is that currently it's very expensive to develop eFuels. Electrolyzers that are used in the process cost a lot, as does generally the whole process, so fuel might end up being really expensive for you, the end user. At the moment, you're looking at 3 to 4 euros per litre of fuel created, and that's just the cost of creation, not barreling, not sending it across to a different country, not arriving into your petrol station, and then not also the tax on top of it. Now yes, hopefully in the future this will become cheaper, but that really depends on whether or not we consider this to be a long-term solution or a short-term solution. Electrolyzers will take a while to become cheaper, they're not just going to get cheap overnight, it will take time. And with governments pushing for internal combustion engines to be out within the next sort of 10 to 20 years, that doesn't give them that much time to get cheap. Oh, and I forgot there was one third point as well. Efficiency is very low in the process. It's around 16% efficiency of power actually going to the wheels after 48% is lost in conversion and a further 70% in the actual combustion process. EVs have a total efficiency, on the other hand, of 72% actually going to the wheels. Simply put, that basically means you put in a whole bunch of effort to not actually get much power. And there are probably more pros and cons than what I've just said anyway. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any. So what are my opinions? I think it will be great for motorsports on the one hand, and I love stuff like F1 and touring cars and all that other good stuff. I think that will be really, really great. It will be good for us enthusiasts as well, so people who absolutely love cars, all us petrol heads or diesel heads out there. It means that we can keep driving our cars potentially for longer. It means that hopefully if the fuel gets cheap enough, we can keep our classic cars going into the future as well. I just think it's a generally good thing for people that love cars. I don't, however, think this is going to be the ultimate solution to mobility moving forwards. However much I would like it to be, I think that it's going to be something that helps us make a gradual change towards other types of mobility. And that also might not be EVs, by the way. I'm not saying that suddenly we're going to all go into electric cars or whatever. I'm just saying that I think that there will be other technologies and innovations over the next few years that start to change how we see cars. We've literally just seen BMW and Audi pull out of Formula E, and BMW literally said that they're looking at different modes of drivetrains and different ways to power their cars. So maybe even they don't think that electric vehicles are going to be the solution to moving forwards, but that doesn't necessarily mean they think that e-fuels are instead. So yes, ultimately my opinion comes down to two things. On the one hand, it enables a longer term continuation of being petrol heads without needing petrol, and it's also hugely positive from an environmental perspective, as we don't need to unnecessarily pollute the world, but I don't think that this is the end. In terms of how this might affect the market, I think that in the longer term this might actually help to maintain the values of petrol and diesel cars if they find a way of doing this cheaply and getting it to the consumer really cheaply as well, being the key point here. Then there's no reason why petrol and diesel cars will go up in value, particularly particularly as well if governments decide that you can carry on driving cars as long as they are using e-fuels rather than stuff that's been taken from the ground. Of course, I could be entirely wrong about this, so feel free to let me know in the comments if you disagree with me or if you have a different view on how this is going to turn out. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Either way, whatever your opinions are, I think it's a pretty cool thing that Porsche and Siemens are doing. Obviously, this tech is not new, as I mentioned at the start of the video. It's stuff that we've had in the pipeline for quite some time, and I really want to see where it goes, and hopefully you guys do as well. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video or learned something new, please do hit the like button. I would really appreciate it. Subscribe as well if you're new, as I put out 2 videos every single week. Massive thank you to the patrons as always, and to you guys as well for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
Listen.